Welcome to Sky Notes. This week, Lillian and Tracy talk about planetary returns. What are they, and when, why, and how to use them? Let's check our Sky Note. Hello, everyone. Hello, Lillian. Welcome to Sky Notes. We are diving into planetary returns. And what that means is that the planets, from the place where we start out, in this case, natal charts, the planets on their cycle will return back to the place that they were in our birth chart. But it's all different because they all move very different speeds. And their level of importance is different based on our own personal astrology and also the timing that we're at, right? Because sometimes a Venus return will be important or not important natally, but become important just based on what's happening in our cycles, right?
Part of what we were talking about before we got online today. I hope you can hear me. Please forgive the shenanigans. So thank you for introducing the topic. And part of what excited me about this is it was the point where I started to see the chart move in a more significant way than the transits. It felt more focused, more exciting, and certainly the effects were more varied. So that was part of my impetus to have us talk about this. And of course, you brought it up too.
Yeah, and I think socially we hear about the Saturn return often. Like I even remember you and I both love the one with Leslie Knope.
Yeah,
and
Parks
they
and
even
Rec.
have Parks and Rec. And there's even an episode where one of the characters is losing her mind and life sucks, and one of the other characters goes, "Honey, it's your Saturn return." But when we see articles and things, it's often the Saturn return. And on social media, I've seen a lot lately of young people who are about to have it go into the Saturn return and are like, "Oh my God, what should I expect?" And you can just tell the tone that they're panicking. So I really like this idea talking about this because we can demystify some of it, and we can talk about how it's not the only thing that returns.
That's right.
And I like it. You said that you felt it was more meaningful than transits in some way. Totally agree. But I also like the continuance of it. It's part of our ever growing and developing story. And the cycles build on each other. And we can look back at other parts of the cycle to inform what's coming, right? And to also, especially during difficult times, so what was I learning then? And maybe what do I need to look at again? Or in really positive times, what was happening and what can I look forward to this time? We each took planets and we're each going to take turns, and we're going to start with the moon.
We can start with the moon. So the moon takes 28 to 29 days to return to the sign it was in. And so you're looking for, I think when I meet people, by and large, when they know some of astrology, they'll say their ascendant, their moon, and their sun. It's fairly easy to find if you've got a chart, and it happens every, let's say, month. So it's going to be a cadence, an impact. And this is one of the ones that, as I was a student studying these, maybe these weren't the most critical transits to observe or the most critical returns to observe. But what I found in observing them is there was a depth of information that I wouldn't have gotten. And it led me, to be honest, to the entire lunar cycle so that I could understand as it went through different combinations of the sun and the moon. But in that way, I found the moon significant and the lunar return significant. What I was trained in is that it's about emotional security. What I've seen a lot is people talking about you'll want to do something cuddly or something like that. Folks I know with like a Capricorn or Aquarius moon, that's the last thing on their mind. That's not going to occur to them, or an Aries moon. So you really do have to pay attention to what your moon brings to the table, what you understand about it. And then if the moon is the ruler of your chart, and the fact that it traditionally builds in weight and impact and then declines in weight and impact through the phasal relationships, I think is really significant and speaks to what you have brought up that's so key, that it will change anything. So one of the things we were talking about beforehand was, if you're at the end of a process and you've got a lunar return coming up, maybe take some time off, maybe take a break. And then that leads to the other thing you reminded me of, which is fantastic, is, we both learned from Kira about the cycle of the moon with her tinctures. And she provides you with a book to journal in and to observe the new moon, full moon, the various cycles through an entire, I don't know, 6-month period to a year, where you come away with this real physical felt sense of what's happening. And I think that's a really amazing way to use the lunar return for sure.
Right, right. And then there's the phasal return, which is a whole other layer of watching the moon and using that energy in whatever way you need to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of where you and I started with our fascination with the moon and the returns and the cycles, right? Because we learned from
Absolutely.
Kira together. And that was my first exposure to that. I had no idea. So
Yeah.
the phasal return is when the sun and the moon make the same relationship to each other every month
Right.
that you have in your birth chart. So it's not in
Right.
the same sign ever or the same house, not ever,
Right.
but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they will be making the same relationship. And so that's a very personal time as well. So if you're a new moon, the sign and the phase might overlap, but otherwise most people have a very different experience with
Oh my
those
gosh.
things, right?
Totally different. Totally
Yeah.
different. Absolutely.
It's funny that you say that about you had mentioned how it's going to be different for each moon sign, right? Some people want to
Absolutely.
nap and other people don't. But it's interesting because it's going to depend on the house that your natal moon is in too,
Right.
because so moon in Aries in the first house is kind of an extra layer of wanting to do something by myself because
Right.
it's, a double whammy.
Yeah.
Somebody who's got a moon in Aries over in the seventh might want to do something that's more with somebody else, but Aries connected, right?
I love that. I can also see them kind of getting scooped up into someone else's stuff, and or what's the other one?
Taking
Oh,
their frustrations out on somebody else.
well, that would be right there, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? But
Yeah.
it wouldn't take long, and they'd
No.
forget really soon. So
Yeah, we don't remember very much. That
yeah,
works out
walk
really
out and walk back in. I always love it when the fire part of me starts activating, which we'll talk about when we get to Venus and Sag.
well. Excellent. All
Venus
right.
return,
So,
rather.
I mean, and another person to look to, Kira's a great person to look to for lunar cycle stuff, and also Andrea Gers. The next one we're going to talk about is the sun. So that's our birthday.
Yeah,
You know, of course it's our birthday, but it's also called a solar return when the sun returns to the exact same place it was by minute and degree and sign, not
right,
the house and the chart, because that's going to change.
right,
And each one of these returns, you create a chart for the return chart. And so often the only thing in the same place is the planet that you're looking at the return for.
right,
Um, and in a solar return, you can have Mercury and Venus also be close to returning just
right,
because of their relationship with the sun. And so in that case, when we're talking about when are these important, so the Venus and Mercury in that particular case could become important. But for this, it's slightly different than a birthday, and it's not always on the same day because the cycle is 365.25.
right,
So it not almost never, but it can often not be right on our birthday. And it marks the beginning of our personal year.
yeah,
So it's where a lunar return is a check-in for our emotional evolution and our emotional growth. The sun is the growth of who we are and who we're becoming, right down to that spark of the sun in the center of who we are. So yeah, it can be seen as the evolutionary of self. It sets the tone for the year, especially if you look to see in that solar return chart where the sun is. That's really
mhm,
important. Um, and the solar return chart shows us what wants to be expressed that year. Because another thing that you do when you look at a solar return chart is you see which houses in the natal chart become important. So
Mm,
that'll tell you which areas of your life are going to be more active that year.
yeah.
And so where the sun is in the solar return chart shows where our solar self will be doing the hard work and the heavy lifting.
Mm,
And there's a real, I don't know this off by heart. I don't know the details of this off by heart, but there's a real cycle to how the pattern of our solar returns, right? So the sun will go through all of the cadent houses one at a time, right?
right.
It'll go through all of the angular houses. So it's not perfect, right? Because of depending on which house system you're using. But it does show a pattern of you're going to get these 4-year active cycles, more
Hmm.
4-year more quiet cycles. So
Hmm.
back to breaking down the 12-year cycle, Lillian and I were talking about this
Yeah.
before, 12
Yeah.
years. And so this sort of fits into that story a little bit too.
So
So
interesting.
it's a yearly cycle, but it is giving us a look at the larger arc of our life when it comes to the sun.
So interesting. And it's also vitality. So I would also offer, if you're not feeling vital, if you're not feeling cohesive, coherent, integrated, it's a really good chart to look at to find out how to get there. And so the house, the cycle that Tracy was just referring to, these are all indications of what you're yearning for, what you're requiring for nourishing that vitality. And I often think of Stephen Forrest says this: if the sun isn't available, the rest of you comes out like a projector without a lens. People can't grasp anything. It's fuzzy. It doesn't make any sense. So you are constructing a lens through which you are going to express yourself. And at these points, you can see what levers you can use through the next year. So for me, for example, Venus is the ruler of my chart. So I'm going to listen to Venus because she's going to have special information for me. And I got that from the solar return chart. So it's a interesting bunch of tools to play with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love the vitality piece that you add because what the sun, so say the birthday you're having, the sun is in the 12th house. Well,
Right.
that's a lower vitality year. And
Yeah.
so it's good for you to know, don't push too hard this year. You're just
Right.
not going to have the clarity and the energy, right? Or say the sun is conjunct the south node. I had that one year, and oh gosh, if you, and you're the desire, if other things are actually also stimulating that sun, the desire can be to push yourself, but
Right.
you're gonna lose juice. So
Right.
yeah, I think that is a really important thing to point out to look at in the solar
Yeah.
return chart around
Absolutely.
vitality for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's a good gauge.
Yeah. All right. So next we have
Venus.
Venus.
Is that
Let's
true?
do it.
Or do we have
Um,
Mercury next?
we can do Mercury next. It's because I screwed it up. I put the moon second in my notes. So then I screwed it up. But yeah, I'll talk a
We
little
can
bit
do
about
what we
Mercury.
want because
Let's
it's
do
our
it.
show. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mercury returns, this is what confuses people, and it even confused ChatGPT the other day when I was
Mm,
doing a bit of work with it, is when you're talking cycles and Mercury. Tropical astrology, what we do is earth centered,
right.
right? Um, and Mercury like goes around the sun often,
Hmm.
but it only goes around our chart once a year,
Yeah.
right? So those are two totally different cycles.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so I had to fight making my notes
Holy
because
cow. Yeah.
there's some confusion. So it
Yeah.
comes to the same place about once a year.
Hmm.
And it depends. You can have a solar return that has a retrograde in it.
Right.
So, right, that can actually lengthen or shorten the amount of time between your Mercury return. And so this is now a return and an evolution in the way we think, the way we communicate, the way we process information. And the other thing that we haven't really mentioned is that if these planets are in charge of really important dynamic houses in your chart, then that's another reason to pay attention. So I'll give an example. So
Hmm.
say you wrote a book and you
Yeah.
want to publish it,
Hmm.
right? So then, and Mercury is what is in charge of your ninth house.
Right.
So because the thing that you're trying to achieve is in that particular part of the chart, you're going to want to go and look and see what your Mercury return did that year,
Nice.
right?
Nice.
To add a layer of where might there be some obstacles, and where are you getting support from?
Hmm.
The overarching story of this year is this the right time to
Right.
try to, publish something? So that's another, each one of these will hold, well, the up until Saturn will hold very important stories in that way. And then
Hmm.
the outers, if you're using them as secondary rulership, can add some
Oh, I love
information.
that.
Yeah.
I love
Now we're
that.
gonna do
Yeah.
Venus. There we go.
There we go. So Venus is between a year and a year and a half in terms of a return. And we were talking about this before, but it's in evolutionary astrology about value. And so it is inward, like the Mercury. And so it's about your own value. And it becomes tricky because a Venus return, depending on your natal sign, could make you more attractive. But even if sort of the whole world falls at your feet, it is irrelevant because the point is, how are you valuing yourself? Are you getting your own back? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you standing up for yourself where you need to and getting out of the way where things aren't nourishing you? Are you clarifying? So it gives you that sense. And I was saying before, I've done charts for Saturn and Mars. And I guess that makes sense because they're trickier, or they are like, ugh, could be dangerous.
Troublemakers.
Troublemakers. I like that. Rascals. And Venus and Jupiter in particular are often sort of celebrated as benefics. And so I haven't done that. But I was saying, I'm really curious now to see a chart for Jupiter return or Venus return because I want to understand that. So again, there could be a lot of beauty or redesign or a visual component to what it is that you desire. I'm not trying to be vague. I'm trying to say you're going to shift your world around in an aesthetic that reflects what's going on inside. If you are in alignment with yourself and you feel presence, it could be a really beautiful time. It could be a time with a lot of people around, if that's how your Venus is set up. Um, and then likewise, if there are transits that are difficult, if there are houses that are difficult, it could signify difficulties with women or um, difficulties expressing what you want. Even if everybody's positive about it, you might still be hesitant. Um, so those are some of the trickier parts that I get from it. And then usually with Mercury, it's a common trope that another shoe will fall after, and you'll hear what people were talking about that they weren't discussing with you while they retrograde was active. And I feel like there's a similar kind of vibe with the Venus return. People often talk about ex lovers coming back, but that's not the point. The point is you're getting a refresher on what it is you want, and so wanting may come back in a way that's asking for your attention. So
Right.
that's a fun part.
Well, and it's a great, I love that you brought up what we want, because to me, that's sort of the crux of Venus, right? That's her energy
It's
at
a
her,
crux of a lot of things,
her
as it
core,
turns
right?
out.
What
Yeah,
do we want?
yeah,
And so there is the potential for a recalibration at the return, or a revisiting of, am I going for the things that I actually want, or do we need to jiggle that a little bit and
exactly.
reimagine it? Yeah, so I think there's a lot of power in working with Venus in that way for sure. When you were talking about good, not good, bad, because we try not to do that, but
Right, right,
that Jupiter and Venus are the benefics.
right.
Um, one
Historical.
of Yeah, well, one of the tricky things with Venus when she's in great shape, is the lazy aspect, the
Right,
luxuriant
right,
aspect of Venus, who would
right.
like to lay on a couch and eat bonbons. And so that could look like a beautiful Venus return chart, But if you compare that to goals and aspirations and, you're planning a year that wants to work really, intellectually you want to work really hard and meet your goals.
Absolutely.
Venus just wants to lay down in a bathtub and eat chocolate.
Well, and not only that, but her warrior aspect is available too. And so that's the part that we're talking about. Like, she's not messing around. If you ask her, and a lot of times, I think Caroline Casey says this the best, where she says, all of the gods are waiting by the phone, but you need to call them if you want some help. So if you're calling her up and saying, I'd like some help standing up for myself, I'd like to feel what it feels like to express myself and get positive feedback, and then figure out what that means, not during, right? I think you can do that, but it's sort of knowing that it happens. Now you can kind of get in touch with it. And it's funny to me because I have a Venus in Sagittarius. And so I just want to run away. I don't want anything to do. I want to go have fun. I want to see new things. I want to be funny. I want to explore. And for a long time, I was going out with a Venus in Capricorn. And wow, you have this much rope to play with a Venus in Capricorn. They would like it if you were on time. Thank you very much. You must follow through. There's a whole degrading of the relationship if you ignore all of that. And so it is really quite important to assess, what does your Venus want? And not fall prey to I'm going to follow what everybody else is doing, because that's go with the flow. And that's what everybody should be doing. I think we work better in community if we balance those two almost impossible to balance things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't matter which one of these returns we're talking about. There's a lot of power in ritual around these returns, right? And so if the Venus stuff is something that you'd like to build, understand better, doing some kind of ritual around your Venus return can have some really amazing bring a lot of amazing gifts and insights.
I agree.
Because I think Venus is something that we can tend to just ignore or downplay or put aside. Its best qualities are not valued in the way that it should be, right? So,
which is crazy because it's so generative. When you align with what you want, it's transformative.
Yeah,
no joke.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so balancing it out next is Mars. So Mars is about every 2 years. It can be between 22 and 26 months, depends on, because it only goes retrograde every couple of years. And this is all about how we go after what we want. This is all about recalibrating how we take action. Also, our sexual energy sits within that Mars realm, our physical energy, and especially in health astrology, that's our muscles and our blood flow, right? And so you could easily see in a Mars return chart if there's going to be, say, anemia is going to kick back in, if that's a problem that you have, right? So there can be some things physically that can really show up in a Mars return chart to help you if Mars things are something that you deal with. As I have an inflammatory problem, right? So Mars can give me Mars returns can give me some great information about what that's going to look like for the 2 years. And also, it's a recalibration about what you're willing to fight for as well. Is there going to be a fight that year, or in that time frame? Is there some kind of conflict that Mars is going to be put forward to deal with?
So interesting.
And we don't want to look at that kind of stuff. It's not our favorite as humans. We usually, if we're going to generalize, avoid, right? Some people love conflict. This is true, but not everybody. And so the Mars return will sort of give us a story and maybe some timing around where that Mars energy is going to be either pushed down or brought up and be the thing that you're displaying for everybody.
Right.
And good to know if you're somebody who's passive and all of a sudden Mars is super energized in the Mars return, it can be disconcerting for a 2-year cycle. That all of a sudden you're ripping everybody's head off and picking fights and and maybe being antagonistic, because Mars, when it gets riled up, especially for people who don't have a riled up Mars, it can be really discombobulating for the people in your life too.
So Mars conjunct the moon in the return chart, or
Or
difficult
square
aspect.
Uranus,
Right, right.
where, or square Pluto, where it's like you're
Mhm.
just gonna feel triggered the whole
Yeah.
time,
Ay, ay, ay.
and the way I would interpret those 2 aspects is, for this cycle, you're going to have to confront
Right,
these issues, whatever the Uranus and Pluto
right.
stuff is, right?
Mhm,
This is the time when you don't get to ignore those things anymore. You're gonna be
mhm.
faced with them, and you're going to need to figure out how you want to stand up for them. How do you stand up for stuff, you
Right.
know? And so those are the themes with the Mars return, for
I
sure.
would add, Rob Hand usually does the Mars is about community, since Venus is about what we need. Mars, in addition to hearing and obeying Venus in a beautiful way, is getting what we need in the context of community. And his suggestion is it kind of goes awry if we try to use it like the Venus, um, just being about ourselves. And then I think about there was another piece to it, which was this one feels like I keep running into these places where I'm having a difficult time describing it, where it's more, I think David Pond talked about it, like that chakra, the third chakra that's Mars run, punchy, it's kind of, So, like you were saying, you could be triggered, or you could just be at the point where you have to kind of figure out how you're going to live with that part of you, and my recommendation would be to receive it with a lot of space, but also, I got to tell you, as a full-fledged Sagittarian who's tried in every way not to live by the rules of natural or man's law, natural law wins every time. So there are rules, plenty of them, that'll help you.
Or not.
I mean, mileage will vary.
And it's funny, I jumped right to Uranus and Pluto for,
Yes, you
energizing
did.
Mars,
Yeah.
but a Jupiter Mars connection that is along, something. So this is the thing, we have those transits, but a Jupiter Mars transit's only going to last a few days. But if it shows up in a return chart,
Yeah.
that's a very extended manifestation of that, what would be a short transit. And when Jupiter energizes Mars, that at the time is, if you like being adrenaline run,
Right. Right.
super fun. I'm a,
Right. I like
adrenaline
it. I like it
personally.
periodically. Yeah.
But not everybody does.
Mm-mm.
And but it's highly stimulating. And what can happen in that case is, at the end you are exhausted because
Right.
you have no sense of the amount of energy that you're putting out, right? Especially if you like your adrenaline,
Yeah.
so those are, yeah, things that when you're dealing with autoimmune stuff, you have to become far more conscious of. I think everybody should, but
Mhm.
in certain situations, it's non-negotiable that you have to
I
be
totally get
conscious
that.
about this,
I
right?
totally get that. And then conversely, speaking of somebody who's had to pay a shit ton for therapy, so I get to be a normal girl. If you're traumatized and you've got stuff sitting in you that's getting ready to blow, you got to watch those Mars returns. That can help you see if this is one of those years where you're going to do it. And again, space, people who can take care of themselves while witnessing you, these things are good. And then you might turn a corner. Because it is, again, when you align it, this is another one of those engines that like you want in your favor. If you nail that chart, if you figure out what those angles are, you're going to have like a really exciting year.
Right, right. Well, and yeah, very exciting year. Sorry, I don't know where I went there for a moment, but I just wanted to say that in terms of the difference between a transit versus a return,
Oh, yeah.
um, you know, we're all, as astrologers, we're usually pretty conscious about the idea of a solar return, and that there's a chart, and when things are going to happen around our birthday, is that going to be in my solar return,
Right.
right? I've said that, I've heard it said many, many, many times. But it is good to differentiate between the two, because it's true. You could end up with something that, like an eclipse season. I've had
Right.
clients this last couple weeks who are having birthdays in this eclipse season. So now this eclipse energy is carrying through their whole year, right? And that's not good or bad, just really good to know that that energy is going to not be short lived for you.
That's right.
It's got a bigger arc in
It's
your
such a good
chart.
point. And if Mars is going retrograde during that process, you could have a 6-month period of back and forth. And with Mars, it really is a pain in the ass when it sticks
Right.
around for longer, because not even Mars wants to do that.
No, no. And I mean, it's not like the return happens and then for a solid amount of time, this is active and happening.
Right.
There's an arc. It's usually more pronounced in the beginning and eventually evolves into, as we become used to the energy and,
Mhm.
and things start to move, and you can progress those charts too. So there's an evolution to it. So it's not
Yeah,
just like one hard or one easy thing that sustains the whole time. So
I
that
agree.
yeah, so
And
that's
I
something to
think you'll
keep in
see it
mind
more
too.
when we get to Saturn, and you'll see
Right.
like it's not like that. So yeah, so the shall I go on to Jupiter?
I'm gonna show Jupiter.
What?
Excellent, there we go.
So Jupiter returns every 12 years, and Alex Chenoweth did a great job of talking about how she looks at Jupiter and Saturn for her classes. So that's all I'll say about that as a foreshadowing. Jupiter in evolutionary astrology is your beliefs, but not beliefs like I think this sports team is going to win. Your beliefs like you are going to react if people tell you that these beliefs are wrong, or they're not going to help you. You may obscure them, you may hide them. It is about expansion. So where it shows up, it's going to be about that. And then the topic will be in the house. Um, so every 12 years, uh, you will have an opportunity to see. Let me say this before I say the next part. So again, Sagittarius, always looking for truth. That's kind of the trope for that. I was laughing with my husband about how I keep going, Eureka, oh shit, Eureka, oh shit, because I'll find a truth and then I'll move into it. And then I don't know all the details and I'm learning it and I lose the plot, you know? And so it's not like a slam dunk to even engage, obviously, in changing your beliefs, because a lot of people really rely on their beliefs to shape the rest of their lives. So it doesn't have to be a radical change, but it is, there's something I like to think about, like an overflowing. Okay. So your beliefs are in there, family's beliefs, society's beliefs, they're all mixing up, mixing up. By the time you hit 12, you're ready to kind of think about something else or have a different way of approaching what is generosity, what are principles, what are beliefs, mercy, judgment. And so that happens every 12 years. And that's all I'll say about that.
Okay.
Before I hear something from you, I'll go back to it. Here's what I'm going to do next. So sorry. I'm so goofy today.
That's okay. Well, and again, so Jupiter, because now we're getting out to those social planets,
Yes.
the importance of your Jupiter return, like how influential that 12-year cycle is for one person, it might not be as obvious for somebody who doesn't have a strong Jupiter in an active part of their chart, making strong relationships to the personal
Good
planets, right?
points. Yeah.
And so for me, Jupiter rules my ascendant and my midheaven, is conjunct the ruler of my sun. Like it's very active in my chart, as
Mm-hmm.
you can tell with the amount of this that I do. Um, but so those 12-year cycles do tell a really important story,
Oof.
especially when it comes to my outer world, because
Yes.
the planet that's ruling your angles is it kind of in charge of how you interact with the world around you, right?
Yeah.
And so, Jupiter is going to tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
It is nice that it's 12 years, 1 year in each sign. It's nice and pretty clean, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for some people, they're not going to have their beliefs as challenged. They're not,
Right.
because Jupiter, what will likely happen with somebody
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't have a really strong Jupiter is that they'll become aware, especially at the return, become
Mm-hmm.
aware of where they sit in their beliefs,
Right.
and maybe start to notice that things might have changed or not changed, or right, people come into their life to challenge those things maybe. But it would be, I think, almost more about beliefs in that case, right? Because then the planet is just sort of in its realm as opposed to having a bunch of influence in different areas of your life.
I
So
think
it
that's so
becomes,
interesting. The immediate image I got, I don't know why, but was somebody volunteering to refloor the church, right? And so they're working with a committee and they're figuring out how to get this done. And so Jupiter returning in a year could bring a lot of opportunities you don't have initially. It can bring support for things that you're up to or that things that your community is up to. It could be a place for you in that community, right? And so you're looking for those things. And yeah, I don't mean to suggest all of the, you want to talk about what's tricky about it, like for example, Jupiter expands things. We don't want like an abscess expanded or cancer expanded or inflammation expanded. So Jupiter can be a sign of risky energy.
and so I think all the planets have that, right? They
Yeah.
all have the thing that they add and the thing that they create tension around, you know?
Mhm, mhm.
So I love that you brought up both, because here's the thing to consider with a Jupiter return is that whatever house it's in that return chart, that means it's going to amplify that part of your chart.
Right.
So that to me, that's probably, if you're only ever going to look at the Jupiter return for one thing,
Yeah.
that's the thing to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Because if it's a house that is a challenge, especially around your beliefs and ideals,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Um, then that 12 years is going to be interesting
Right.
and a big part of your social learning.
It's a lot. It's
Yeah.
just a heck of a lot is all. And if you know going into it, um, that your beliefs, I don't know how to say it. It's sort of like as an individual, you're coming into society and learning stuff. If the language of your beliefs change, that doesn't necessarily mean your values change. It's just super complicated right now. We don't all have the same language or the same ideas. And yet you can feel when somebody's heart is present. And so
Mm.
so there's that notion. But yeah.
It's fascinating to me when, as you know, we started this conversation talking about the evolution of
Yeah.
us as people, right? And how
Yeah.
this is showing us that evolution. Even in the way we talk about Jupiter over the past 3 years, and with the way history has unfolded, our
Yeah.
discussion about Jupiter has shifted quite a bit as well.
Yes.
Like, I think that I don't know that any of us would have realized the importance of our ideals and our beliefs and where that fits us into our story. So I don't know. I think that it's really interesting to listen to people talk about it.
It's so cool. This is where I start talking about we're all biologically connected to each other. And have you seen that little monkey Punch, that little macaque that they've been showing pictures of? Don't go looking for him. He's doing fine, but he's a little baby monkey macaque, and he was rejected by his mom. So he carries around another macaque, a macaque doll that's like
Oh.
5 times bigger than him. And he drags it around because he needs to be with other macaques. And then he joined a group. And yesterday they had all over the place these videos of like younger monkeys, like, get out of here, little Punch. And then it's like, but I love little Punch, right? And then the older monkeys find him and they're grooming him and he's starting to fit in and he's got his little doll, but he's hanging with the monkeys and stuff like that. Isn't that sweet?
Yeah, I feel bad for Punch.
I
Well,
don't,
we
yeah.
dragged Jupiter out because we know we have to talk about Saturn next.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I don't know what
Don't
that
worry about
was
it.
about.
Don't worry about it. I think Jupiter is such an important part of the conversation always, but even more important these days. So I
Yeah.
loved it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes. All right. So now we're going to talk about discipline, time, being a grown up. So Saturn has been demonized, the return has been demonized, but there are a lot of factors that play into what a Saturn return looks like. So let's talk about the cycles. It
Mhm.
is 28 and a half to 30 years. And it depends on whether Saturn is retrograde when you're born, because the cycles will start later for somebody who has it retrograde at birth.
Interesting.
The other thing that's different is that if you have Saturn retrograde in your birth chart, your
Mhm,
first Saturn return happens before you turn a year old because it will
mhm.
return to its place when you're born in that first year of life.
Yeah,
So calling the 30-year-old one your first Saturn return is actually not true. And a
right.
lot of people have Saturn retrograde in their birth chart. But Saturn is very much about time. And so it's tied to our maturing period. And the cycles that we go through with Saturn mark different phases of our aging cycle as human beings.
Yes.
And so that Saturn return at around 28 and a half to 30 becomes about, okay, so we thought we were grown-ups the last few years, but how do we really want to be a grown-up now that we actually had these years to learn? And so there's 7-year cycles within the Saturn cycle.
Yeah.
And so the first one happens around the age of 7, the next one happens at about 14, 15, the next one happens around 21, 22. And it's what's fascinating is that no matter what happened at the first Saturn square, which happens around 7, when you talk to people and you ask them about significant things that happened in childhood, they'll almost always say, I was about 7.
Yeah, I've
And that's
noticed
not
that.
necessarily true.
Right.
But there's such an ingrained thing that happens at that age that anything difficult before the age of about 10, we think happened when we were 7
Isn't
or
that
8. Or,
something? Yeah.
it's so interesting to me. And there are like, Lisa Scheim does a great lecture on the Saturn squares and
Mhm.
things like goes through charts of people and experiences they have at 7 and how they connect to the Saturn return. So that's really fascinating. But all the cycles are about maturity and accountability. Commitments begin or end. Um, you're gaining authority. That's a
Right.
very Saturn word as you're moving through life. And these checkpoints with Saturn are about that building of authority. And so if you are getting credit for things that you actually haven't built the authority for, or feel like you haven't built the authority
Oh
for,
gosh, yeah.
that can get checked. So
Right.
those are the things that can feel very difficult, right?
Mhm.
um, there's an increase as you age, there's an increased awareness about time, and that is
Yes.
directly tied to Saturn. And we know that just based on how screwy time has been with
Yes.
Saturn through Pisces, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and then there's also an important piece because Saturn restricts, it
Mhm.
loves any kind of fasting because it likes to keep everything simple and clean and plain.
Yeah.
So these part of the Saturn cycle is, what do I need to prune? What do I need
Mhm.
to get rid of to be able to
Nice.
move forward more efficiently, or
Mhm.
whatever that word might be for you?
Mhm.
So the first, can I talk a little bit about the
Please.
okay,
I think that'd
so
be great.
the first one, the first Saturn square around 7, there's often a conflict or a challenge that comes about as a rite of passage, right? And then the person will deal with that during the next 7 years. And then the opposition, which happens around 14, it gives you the objective view of what you're going to do next, what you're going to get rid of, what you need to leave behind. And then at the closing square, we start to see the consequences of our choices and
Mhm.
actions, especially when you're associating them with Saturn and the Saturn story.
Mhm.
And then we get a chance to sort of fix them, solidify the things that we want to keep before we start that next cycle.
Mhm.
And so what's interesting to me within that story is that when I talk to people about their Saturn return and their Saturn story, I love to know, so what did you do around 21?
Yeah.
Because often what you see happen is something that started at 21 gets taken further at the Saturn return. So you met your partner at 21, got
Mhm.
married
Mhm.
around your Saturn return. You got married after that first square, started having children at the Saturn. So
Right.
there's like a either an ending or a continuation of those closing square
I like
stories
that.
for sure. And
Yeah.
it's consistent. Like people
Yeah.
often have a very clear line through those Saturn cycles. It's
Right.
really interesting. Yeah. Now the Saturn return chart, what I have found most has given me the best information, I guess, is which house the Saturn sits in the Saturn return chart.
Mhm.
Of course, the aspects, but
Mhm.
also which house is brought to the ascendant of this. Your natal
Mhm.
house comes to the ascendant of that Saturn return
Right,
chart, because
right.
that will be that part of your life will be a big part of the Saturn return story.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I made a little note here about the demonizing of the Saturn
Mhm.
return. There are a lot of us who did not have horrible Saturn return
Right,
stories.
right.
And often what I have found is that people with Saturn retrograde, that's a generalization, but more often than not, people with a natal Saturn retrograde, their Saturn return was a growth moment. It
Got it.
was a true, like a juicy maturing.
Yeah.
Often a doing something that you were told you couldn't do, and you kind of
Mhm.
overcome that restriction that was
Yeah,
laid on you,
yeah.
right? And so that's not a scary Saturn return
Right,
story, right?
right.
Um, Also, oh, there's at the same time, there's cycles happening underneath. So the
Mhm.
Saturn cycle and the progressed lunar cycle are almost the same amount of time.
Right, right.
So if there's a very deep and maybe traumatic lunar arc happening underneath, those two things overlapping can definitely lead to an emotional
Mhm.
transition or an emotional
Mhm.
experience that
Mhm.
forces somebody to grow up,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, to me, tell me what you think about this, Lillian. To me, Saturn, it does really want the best for us.
Mhm.
It just really wants us to work for it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I get a super neutral vibe from it. I don't get, trying to be tricksy, and my experience of the Saturn returns has been intense opportunity. I was in Scotland studying art during my last, Saturn return, and then I came back and lost my house, my lover, my this, my that, my the other, but not to terrible things. My lover came out, I moved, different things happened. So I wanted to make a note to say, I love that the examples are all real world, happening in the real world, because Saturn is also the real rules of the real world that periodically change.
That's true.
So when I think of Saturn return, I think of like being over obligated or tired, or, you're talking about that last closing square. And I would acknowledge that it could happen between that period and the return. But, we're encouraged to do so much in the Western hemisphere to, growth should be eternal. By the time you're at that closing square to the return, you may be tapped out. You may have accumulated too many things. And therefore, the pruning might happen on its own without you. And the goal is to graciously let go of the things that aren't suited for you. And then that takes us right back to what is it that you're trying to accomplish, so that you can ask Saturn for the real life structure that will help you accomplish these goals. So for the moments where you feel weak, you can make a good decision. You know what you're supposed to do. You know your parameters. You're just going to do it. And then it can become really matter of fact. And I do love what you said about it can be emotional, because when I say real world, I mean your car might break down, right? Some bill turns up unpaid that you've been paying, some complication that happens that you have to reverse. What you're talking about, because of that lunar component, is, and then it pisses you off. And then you start to question who you are. And then you crap on yourself. And that's the problem with authoritarian energies, right? They're great when they're leading you along. They're great when I'm not saying that right. They're great when they're being true leadership, showing you a way forward, being accountable, taking on part of the community goal. It's terrible when it's telling you who you are. It's not Saturn's place to tell you who you are. It's Saturn's place to tell you how well you're doing with what it is you're trying to accomplish. So at most, it's a, beloved granny who's pinching your cheeks too hard and giving you like a whole kit to take home of things that you've been really excited about. So I wanted to talk about the second Saturn return that I personally just went through, and I was like, whatever. I mean, God, life is so crazy. What am I going to do? Dictate what's supposed to happen? No, I'm going to look at what's going on. I wanted to say to start a discussion briefly about the midlife period. There's a bunch of stuff. There's the Jupiter return, right, at 48, is that, would you say? And
Yeah.
that sometimes can kick it off. I had an early nodal return that kicked it off.
Right. Well, and we also have so the Saturn opposition will happen very shortly after the Uranus opposition. Yes. So we've got those things dancing together too.
Exactly. So that's the Uranus opposition is 42. So so you're kind of rolling through this thing where it's almost like the universe is taking apart all of your ideas about what life would be. And I certainly feel this way, having just concluded my Saturn return, where I'm like, oh my God, it's so cute. All the stuff I thought I would need. Okay. Or, oh my goodness, I thought these relationships would last forever. Or, oh my goodness, I thought these communities would evolve and grow. And, maybe they're evolving and growing in a way that I don't particularly see. But yeah, you're catching all of them. So the nodes might, the Jupiter might, then Saturn, and then the Uranus opposition and Saturn opposition. It's kind of a gangbusters kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So we're going to talk about Uranus now. Do you want me to go first? You want to go first?
No, you go.
Oh, okay. So when we talk about the outer planets, like the Uranus is really the only one that we have a chance of hitting, because it returns to its place in our chart at the age of 84, about there. And I have not actually paid a huge amount of attention at the opening square and the closing square, because the opposition is what we socially refer to as the midlife crisis. Right. And the reason that's the case is Uranus is all about our individuation from the collective. Right. I often say when somebody's having a Uranus transit, this is about letting your freak flag fly. Right. And how are you being held back? How is your uniqueness being held back? Those are the things to shake off when Uranus is part of the story. And so you'll get clues. I've looked back at my Uranus square that happened before the opposition. And that would be, let me think. So 42. So then we're looking at 21. So again, there you go. There's that 21 mark,
there
right?
You go. Yeah.
And so not only are you now looking at what you want to commit to, but at 21, you're also like, how do I want to stand out?
Yeah.
And do I want to stand out? Right. You think about that age, and like there's such a conflict there.
Yeah.
Right. Do I want to just hide and fit in, or do I want to actually stand out? So that's the Uranus story in there is the standing out bit. Yeah, I've got opening square 20 to 22 years of age. Look at me. Yeah. So first push for independence, breaking from inherited identity. I like this. Uranus, anytime we're talking Uranus, it's going to be about what social shit do you need to shake off that you don't need to become the best embodiment of who you are?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Have you tracked the opening and closing square for yourself?
I haven't, but at 21, I changed my name. And then I waited 7 years to make sure it would stick.
Oh, there you go.
and yeah, I mean, is it okay if I go into what I think about?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So my sense of that opposition, and this has also gone towards readings I've done for folks who are approaching that 84th year, is that, we're kind of sold a bill of goods that everything's done before we're ready to capably join our lives and create a life that has meaning and nuance and all that good stuff. And what I think Uranus does is creates an entirely new map. And so that sense of the opposition, you may experience it as, I didn't get the shit done I wanted to get done. And I apologize for cussing. But that's not a good feeling, right? Like that's just, you may feel like there's nothing left. You may feel like you don't have energy for anything. Uranus is showing you where you do have energy for something left. And it's showing you where a brand new map exists. And my sense of folks who are around, this is around the second Saturn return, but I want to be clear that I'm talking about cruising up to that Uranus return, is you open yourself to the new life, and that the mistakes are made when you say it's too late, because that's not what the transits are saying. They're saying this piece is no good, right? So change the piece, wear your watch on the other wrist for a while, like find out a new way to look at these things so that you get to the most functioning stuff. Because like you're saying, Uranus, very powerful energies, not ill-intended, not trying to get you.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. With Uranus specifically, whether it's by transit, by return, whatever it's doing, it is telling you, it's shaking the ground underneath your feet. So
Yeah,
whatever is no longer working for you, growing in that direction, can be dropped.
yeah,
It's shake it loose,
yeah,
right? And I always, I mean, Uranus is pretty, what's the word that I want? Like harsh in terms of, like, it's quick and fast.
yeah,
There's no gentleness about
right,
Uranus, and there's no
right,
easing into a Uranus
yeah,
transit or a strong Uranus
yeah,
aspect chart or whatever. Uranus is going to be fast. It's going to come from a direction you least expect. I always say that's the worst when somebody's going through massive Uranus stuff as an astrologer, because it's the thing you didn't think of. So
yeah,
don't waste too much time trying to analyze it, because
yeah,
it's not going to go that way. But it's the same when we're talking about the evolution of ourselves, right? It's the unexpected pieces of ourselves that we
right,
can be taught to hide or to not embrace, or, I love my Uranus example is always David Bowie, because he had it so strongly connected to his ascendant. So I
yeah,
think we really felt that Uranus
yes,
energy from him, and
yeah,
he changed all the time, and he was a new
yeah,
iteration of himself, and we never knew what to expect.
right,
That's super Uranian, and
yeah,
that's, with
I
the
love that,
cycles of Uranus, those are the
yeah,
types of things that Uranus is going to kick up or be looking for. Yeah.
yeah, I agree, I like that.
I like the closing square. Some of the themes that I'd come across. I was looking at one of my favorite outer planet books, is the Howard Susportis,
Oh,
Gods of
yeah,
Change.
yeah,
If you're looking for outer planet themes, there's
I
nothing
agree,
comparable to that book, in my opinion.
yeah,
But so, like, radical authenticity check, you
yeah,
know, I love that.
yeah,
A refusal to live outdated rules.
right,
Love it. And then the return, shedding old social expectations for good.
I
Like,
love that,
you've done the cycle, you don't need to hold on to that anymore. The completion of the individuation arc is another thing that had come up. Where's that good line that I gave us?
oh,
Anyways, at the Saturn return, you have nothing left to prove.
that's the one,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
one, and
Yeah.
that's perfect, yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
and then I have to bring up, Harold and Maude,
Mm.
because there is a component where it may be time to go, and maybe you have done everything. And that's a great indicator of somebody who lived themselves into that, a great story of that. There's no need to die. It's not about death. It's about renewal. This is about like acknowledging that you made it, or acknowledging what you were able to make happen for yourself.
Exactly. Well, and when I think about the Uranus return, or even just that last before you hit the return, I think about all these groups of women in that age group who are just defying
Oh, yeah.
expectation, what an old
Yeah.
woman is supposed to do. And that to me is embracing that Uranus energy every time I see it,
Absolutely.
wearing the purple hat and wearing all
Yeah.
anything you ever wanted to wear.
I
That's
just saw
Uranian 100%.
I just saw an Olympian celebrate with her son by signing to him, "Mommy won." I wish I knew how to sign, but that unexpected component, right? Her son's like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "I'm a winner. a winner.
Love it. Love
Yeah.
it. Well, and the thing to keep in mind when we're talking about Uranus is it is, where Mercury is our central nervous system, Uranus is that outer layer of nervous system.
Yeah.
And so whenever we are having Uranian moments, that'll start to work ahead of time. You
Yeah.
can feel
Oh,
it.
yeah. Yeah.
So if you're going to go through a Uranus transition, your parasympathetic nervous system will let you know ahead of time that there's
Yeah.
something coming, and just
Yeah.
know that this is an authenticity check,
Yeah.
Because that's what
Yeah.
Uranus is asking for.
Yeah. You can let it through.
Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
Neptune, your turn.
Neptune. Yeah. Neptune returns once every 165 years. And so we haven't had that yet. The
Not
end.
yet.
I think it's your turn now.
Okay, thanks. My note for Neptune is we don't live long enough yet.
That's right.
But Neptune it's all about our faith,
Right. Right.
so whenever we have the check-ins with the Neptune, it's going to test our faith. Neptune
Right.
transits and Neptune cycles can be really challenging
Oh,
if you are a
absolutely.
mercurial
Hmm.
in your mind person, because Neptune would rather you work in your intuition. So
Right.
if you're having some Neptune things, like I have Neptune opposing my Mercury right now.
Right.
So if there's stuff getting in the way of you using your intuition, right, and having faith that you're on the right path and you're doing the things you're supposed to be doing, Neptune will go, here, let's wipe out the thing that's getting in the way of you having faith.
Right.
And so we're going to have every 65 years. So we're thinking these are 40-year check marks,
Right.
So
Yeah.
that first Neptune square is going to happen right around that Uranus opposition.
And that's the one where you may lose your faith, right? You may feel
Yep.
that, you didn't quite nail it. It's an opportunity to go within. And I love what we say all the time about that Neptune, because it's a forgetting and remembering beast. You'll remember stuff you never thought you'd remember. You'll forget stuff you never thought you'd forget, or that you immediately need to have access to.
Very, very true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, Neptune is as enigmatic,
Right.
to try to talk about as it is in what it does in our lives.
Yeah.
But what it will do is it will take, whenever it's coinciding with any of these other cycles, it will make them a spiritual experience. Right?
Or we will be confronted with illusions, right?
Yeah.
Or
Oh, yeah.
delusions, which
Right.
are delusions are illusions we put on ourselves. Right.
Yes.
And so when they dissolve, the goal is not to chide ourselves about falling for it. Holy cow, that's what we do. It's to, again, align yourself with the function. When you align with Neptune, you're aligning with grace. So there's a good advantage to be had there.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, now we have Pluto. Now, Pluto's hard to talk about in terms of timing because Pluto has an extremely elliptical path.
Yes.
It's not round. So what happens is that Virgo and Pisces are at the short ends. They're the shortest signs that Pluto goes through. So the smallest generations, the fastest, the earliest markings of these transits, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's favorite transit book that they start out with is Rob Hand's Transits, right?
Yeah.
And at the time that he wrote it, and I never have checked the date on this, but in the generations that he's speaking to at the time that he writes it, the Pluto trine, nobody's living to that point yet.
Right.
Because of the generations that they're coming from.
That's right.
And so like I have written some things down here. So actually it's funny because when I did the Saturn talk where I look at all of the overlapping things that are happening at the same time, I was in my Pluto trine.
Oh, hey.
And I was only like early 50s, no, late 40s, something. Like I was young, right? Really young. And here he's saying you're not going to live that long. It's a little bit of a freak out. But Pluto takes 248 years to get all the way around. So like Neptune, we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
And so somebody born in the 1900s would have Pluto in Gemini. And that means that they're going to have that Pluto trine. So that's 120 degrees away from itself.
Right.
In their 70s.
Right.
So that's the generation before the Pluto in Cancer, which is actually what Rob is.
Yeah.
Someone born in 1925, now that's Pluto in Cancer, is going to be 65 because now the cycle is actually getting faster, right?
Right.
By 1946, you have somebody with Pluto in Leo, the trine is at 54.
Wow.
And by 1969, Pluto in Virgo around 50, maybe
Yeah.
even a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And so we're now at a point it starts to elongate. Now the Pluto in Libra generation is going to have it, at 54 and so on and so forth. So it's starting to spread out quite a bit more. So this is an interesting one to talk about because it's not the same for each
Right.
generation. And
Right.
I believe it's one of those things that differentiates
I
generations
think
as
so. I do want to talk about the nodes. So in
yeah.
evolutionary astrology, your soul is transmitted through the south to the north node. You arrive in the south node and you are aiming towards the north node in an aspirational way, because if we do not aspire, any arc goes down. So if you don't have something to aspire to, your arc's going to be smaller and you'll achieve less. So that's part of the idea. And then your soul's personality is expressed through Pluto, and by sign and by house and by aspects. So it carries a lot of weight. I look, and in my chart, it has many, many things associated with it. So for me, I feel that south node. However, in real life, what it is where the moon's orbit hits the ecliptic on both sides. And so there's a south node, which I can't remember if it's the going up way or coming down way, but it's the it's the turn that describes it. So if your south node, let's see, we talked about 18. I had a south node return. I had a nodal return around 44, and it was so intense because you think you're done with issues and your south node is holding on to these themes and topics, and then ta-da, they show up again. So you can interpret them in a variety of ways. You can say, I have failed to keep these things out of my life, which is not true. They're back to show you something. You can say, oh, these things are back to tell me something, which is what I would recommend. Or you can, curl up in a fetal ball. That was me for a little bit, but it's really based on the transit. So the goal that I felt coming out of that was to sense into the themes that I carry through my life, right? And a lot of them are karmic relationships, questions about relationships, and questions about groups and how groups gather. Is what I took away from that. So that's my 2 cents there.
Excellent. Well, so it breaks down, 18 years breaks down into every 4.5 years.
Okay.
So we have, and to me, depending on the transits and everything else that's going on,
Yeah.
The nodal opposition,
Yes.
which actually happens at the same time as the Saturn return.
Okay.
So it's adds another layer to the
Yeah.
whole Saturn return not being the whole story, in
Mhm.
that time. And so the way I approach the nodes is there's a connection to your purpose with the nodal axis
I
in
love that.
your chart, right?
Yeah.
And I also look at it from the traditional point of view of where you have a lot of energy and where you lose a lot of energy. North node, there's a lot. South node, you can leak energy
Yes.
out of. And so the opposition gives each side a chance to see how it's doing, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Whereas the square likely will create some kind of a conflict, inner, outer, doesn't matter, that kind of wants to nudge you back onto the path if you're afraid or you're not quite there.
Yeah.
So these are often like soul level things. So they can be so uncomfortable or so terrifying or just disturbing because it's happening on not an earth level that we're used to dealing with every day.
And don't you think because of that reason, it could be easily ignored as well? I mean, I brought up that thing about how it's actually just these 2 points, because it could be that they're not located in a place where you're getting the information directly. But what Tracy said is still true. You are getting all that energy regardless.
Yeah.
Regardless.
Yeah. And there's always lessons attached to that nodal axis,
That's right.
right? The signs that the nodes are in, there's a very important story for you to tap into about the 2 signs on either end.
That's right.
That if you're not living in them or you're not paying attention to them at those important nodal points every 4.5 years, there's a check-in, and if they're difficult, then you might have strayed from what you're needing to be focusing on in the nodal story.
So interesting. And then remember, if it arrives with the moon, it could be super changeable, right? And so it's not that you didn't hold steady; it's that at the tail end something came in and diverted you, right?
And I also have the dreaded square to the node. So there's always, that piece and that planet's always an important part of the story
That's
too.
so interesting. Yeah. So let's talk about that just briefly, because there's a lot of folks with that. In evolutionary astrology, that's called a skip step. And that could be that you've perfected that work, or you haven't done that work, or that pieces of the work that are around that theme. So you were saying you had squares. I know somebody with a Jupiter square to the nodes, Jupiter in Pisces. And so it is fascinating to watch them struggle with how to approach their own generosity, how to express their beliefs, how to be Jupiterian. It's in the 11th house as well. And so typically the solution is you turn to the right, you pretend you're sitting on that planet, and then you look at the nodes and turn to your right. And for this person, that would be the north node. And so they'd start expressing the north node more, but it could be the south node. And so there'd be an invitation to reflect more on the south node. And so skip step could mean sometimes you have expertise, but it's not reliable. It's not always going to be there.
Right. Have you noticed that, because I love the evolutionary stuff, but I lean more into the psychological piece of the astrology story. And one of the things that's been pretty consistent is the skip step, the square to the nodes. If it's a personal planet, especially, I'll ask somebody, do you find that this, so say for me, it's Mars, right? The taking action, is that the thing that's hard in moving forward? Is that the one piece that you feel like you struggle with, right?
Right.
And for me, I mean, it's Mars and Sag, so it's so everywhere that it is the thing that gets in the way for sure.
Right.
And now, last but not least, is Chiron. And
That's right.
Chiron is like Pluto. It has a hugely elliptical orbit, and Aries and Libra sit at the points. So we actually have had Chiron right now. The return is at 52. But how long it lasts, and it can vary. I think it's between, say, 48 and 52, I think is the number. It's smaller because it's a faster orbit than Pluto, of course. But as somebody with Chiron and Aries in the generation where it's the longest, other than the other side, Libra, my Chiron return was longer than some of my Pluto transits have been, because it was a full 5-hit transit, and it was Chiron moving at its very slowest. So it was significant, and of course it's significant in my chart, so of course it had that extra layer. But Chiron it can be said that it's a story, a scar, an issue that we come in with, that we spend our lives working on. There are a lot of lessons wrapped up in Chiron. Chiron itself is going to show where we have healing abilities. It has a lot of gifts that it brings with it. So knowing where Chiron is in your chart is important. And these phases that we go through with Chiron is there to show us what our gifts are, right? So that return is coming into that Chiron power. And if there are issues around the Chiron scar at the return, we're like, okay, you need to deal with it. It's time to deal with this. And to me, because it's back in Aries, socially, it's really relevant with a lot of the things that we're dealing with right now, because Chiron in Aries is very much about independence versus lonely. We're hearing that a lot in the dialogue with people right now. To me, that speaks so much to that Chiron and Aries piece.
And a call for community, right? Like people I know are getting together for potlucks just to get to know their neighbors and stuff.
For sure. And when we were talking about the Pluto and generational piece, I'm going to say that a lot of when we talk about, especially say Gen X, a lot of the things that are attributed to Gen X are Chiron and Aries. They're also Pluto and Virgo, but they are very Chiron and Aries. And when you talk about latchkey kids,
Mhm.
That is a Chiron and Aries signature, not a Pluto signature.
Yeah, yeah, kind of, the School of Hard Knocks kinda deal.
Mhm.
Yeah, I buy that. I
Yeah,
buy
and
that.
that, you know, you think about the transition socially, a lot of both parents working, you know, kids left on their own to do what they
Mhm.
want. So in the Chiron way, it builds gifts in that direction, right?
Yes,
A very resilient, a very independent generation. But
right.
there's a scar around that that needs
Right,
to be
right.
healed. And I'm going to say one of the most interesting things from my Chiron return was that I called it toxic independence,
Oof, I love
right?
that.
That where it was a necessity growing up to be that level of independent. But as an adult, trying to interact with people, it can be quite toxic with people who would like
Yes.
to help you. And so those are the kinds of lessons that become very in your face when
Yeah,
Chiron returns, you know?
yeah. It's often described as, like, the place where we re-wound ourselves. And so that could be that we have the expectation that something bad will happen and then we create it. That can be that we don't think of ourselves particularly well, and so that gets spread out to other people who then reflect that back to you. And so Chiron as a myth was the teacher of many Apollo, Hippocrates. He was very instrumental, and it's because of what he went through and converted, and again came back to his true authentic self that allowed that all to exist. So I love all the stuff that we're talking about, and when I think about, in particular, the Aries, I think about the challenge to that confidence, and the place of courage in our lives, and what that does for us. And I have always followed Chiron because it's very closely wound up in all of the stuff in my chart, and it's in Pisces. And so when you talk about like leaky chart, there are several spots where you know there is both an abundance or overabundance of energy and a desperate need to like get rid of that energy, or better understand how to navigate with it.
Right,
So
right,
it is part of that refinement piece, I think.
right.
Yeah,
Well, and if we talk about it within the context of the cycles that we've been discussing,
yeah,
the Chiron opposition is going to hit around 25.
right,
So it's bookmarked by those two Saturn pieces,
right.
right? It's bookmarked by the first Uranus square is in there. And so there's that at the opposition, taking a look across and seeing, okay, so how am I using this now and how is it affecting me now? So there is a healing arc
Yes,
that happens sort of in the middle of all the other cycles that we were talking about and returns and what's the word I want? When there's a road signs
yes,
along the way,
yes. Got
right?
it.
Chiron is a big part of that story, although
Absolutely.
it might be happening under the surface and we don't realize what's going on. These are going to be more important for some people, more impactful, more active, depending on what's going on. So overall, the return planet is, if it's considered to be the ruler of the chart, so it rules the ascendant or more than just the ascendant. If it's the final dispositor in your chart, meaning it's in its own sign and everybody is kind of going back to it if you follow rulerships, then the return of that particular planet is going to be significant through your entire life. So, like I said, I have Jupiter that rules my chart, so that 12-year cycle is very significant.
Mhm.
The solar return is always significant, but if it includes planetary returns within the solar return, then those other planets also become a big part of the solar and the personal growth piece of the solar return story. And then the last piece of when the returns become more important than normal is that if they are by perfection the lord of the year, the planet in charge of that year based on
Mhm.
the house. And so paying attention to the return of that planet, if it's one of the ones that's slower, we'll say Saturn, you have a Saturn
Sure.
return during a Saturn ruled year,
Right.
that's going to be pretty Saturnian and
Get
could
ready.
be a bit heavier,
Yeah,
right? A bit more intense.
yeah.
Um, Same with Jupiter. If it's a Jupiter return year and Jupiter's Lord of the Year, it's going to be active and Jupiterian. And then but it becomes really significant with Mercury and Venus and the faster ones because those ones, if they're not part of your normal pay attention, can get really heightened, and areas of your life that you're not used to getting a lot of action in all of
Yeah.
a sudden become more active, right? This is our month ahead episode. So we're going to talk
Three
about March.
transits and pull a
Yes.
card.
Yes. And we've got, I mean, the astrology next week is pretty wild.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about that, and because we've got another eclipse coming.
Here
So
we
yeah,
go. Yeah, right at the beginning of the
we're
month.
going to get
Here
ready
we
for
go.
March. All
Yeah.
right, everybody. Thank you for
Thank
watching. Thank
you.
you, Lillian.
We'll see you next week. Thank you,
And we'll see
Tracy.
you next week. Mwah.
Mwah.